And now there's a whole new land, the new Tomorrowland, where you can journey past the planets, soar through space, travel through time, and come face to face with the most frightening extraterrestrial alien creature you could ever imagine.
Hello, everybody. This is Max Jensen, also known as the Disney Historian here, and today I'm going to be covering, in episode 1 of my podcast, the controversial Alien Encounter ride at Disney World. To start looking at the history of this ride, we're going to talk about the ride experience, we're going to talk about sort of what led up to the ride being constructed, like where it began, and eventually where it ended. So we'll start with a very brief overview of the ride experience itself. So the ride was located in Tomorrowland in Disney World, specifically New Tomorrowland, which we'll get to in a second. So when you entered the ride, you would enter the Tomorrowland Convention Center. So the entire Tomorrowland section of the park was themed around this intergalactic spaceport. So you would enter the convention center of this intergalactic spaceport. There would be signs all over the place warning parents that this ride was not intended for children. Of course, a lot of parents ignored these signs, which is part of the problem, part of the reason it closed eventually. You would go into a pre-show. There was two parts to this pre-show. The first part was sort of like this video would play. It's basically a introduction to the sort of universe. You would learn about a company called XS Technology who had sort of perfected this teleportation technique that they wanted to demonstrate to all of you in the convention center. The pre-show would include Tyra Banks, who you might know now as the host of, not the host, I don't know what to call her. She's on America's Got Talent. She's one of the people on America's Got Talent. And you would also see the guy, I don't know his actual name, forgive me for that, but it's the guy who played the principal in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He was also part of the show. So once that part was done, the doors would open and you would go into the next part of the pre-show where you'd have a robot who was originally voiced by, I want to say Phil Hartman. He was originally voiced by Phil Hartman, but he was eventually changed to be voiced by none other than Tim Curry himself. You would see this robot who would demonstrate the power of teleportation to you by teleporting a little alien called Skippy across the room. Now, this was intentionally dark because after he teleported this cute little alien across the room, Skippy would be all fried and he would be all messed up, and then the robot would actually kill Skippy by causing him to vanish indefinitely. So after that fun experience, you would go into a circular theater where you would take a seat in one of the many seats that was sort of surrounding this tube in the middle of the room. The lights would eventually dim. A video would play on the monitor where they're basically like, oh, okay, we're going to teleport one of you to our planet so that you can sort of, interact with us. But eventually, the guy who played the principal in Ferris Bueller, in this universe, he's known as Chairman Clinch of whatever XS Corporation, did this. He decides he's going to teleport himself to Earth so that he can talk to all of the people in the room rather than just one person going to the other planet and being able to interact with him. So, he gets in the tube and they teleport him, but he gets lost somewhere along the way on a planet in the solar system somewhere. So then they decide to search for a signal. They found something, but they don't know what it is. But they decide to take the risk and teleport whatever this creature is to Earth, believing it to be Chairman Clinch, but it's actually a giant alien. So the alien breaks the tube that it's stored in. The lights go off, and this is when the ride really starts, because in the seats were these sensory devices that would maybe tickle your neck or create air pressure that would blast you in certain places to make it feel like the alien was sort of crawling all over the audience and dripping spit on you. And at one point in the ride, there's a maintenance worker who comes in to fix the lights, and he's slaughtered, and his blood sprays all over you. And this continues for a couple minutes until they finally manage to lure the alien back into a tube to teleport it away, but before they can teleport it away, the pressure in the tube builds up and the alien explodes, and it explodes all over the audience, and it's really disgusting. And that is the ride. It was sort of darkly humorous in a way, but also it scared a lot of people, and it scarred a lot of small children with like its dark atmosphere, and it's intentionally made to terrify people. So it's not hard to see why the ride was so controversial. But before we talk about the reasons it closed, we're going to go and talk about how the ride actually came to be in the first place. So the story of Alien Encounter really begins with one man, Michael Eisner. Now this guy is very controversial amongst Disney fans because he's sort of he saved the park initially. He got it back from a big slump when he first got there, but over time he sort of became this power hungry type of guy, and he tended to cut costs and try and cut corners on all the projects. So he's very controversial in Disney history. So this guy, Michael Eisner, he's the Disney CEO. He looks at the Disney theme parks, specifically Disneyland, and he says, "Okay, this is a very good park if you're 5 years old, for example, but where are the teenagers going to go in these parks to have as much fun as, say, a little child would?" So he wanted to build edgier, more frightening attractions to bring in these teenagers. So he went out and got Disney receipt. They got the permission to use the aliens from the Alien movies in an attraction in their park. Eisner and the a team of young Imagineers basically came up with this idea called Nostromo, named after, of course, the ship in the Alien movies, where it would be a sort of interactive shooting dark ride. If you've ever been on Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters, or as I like to call them, Buzz Lightyear's Ass Blasters, in Tomorrowland, it's a similar concept, but imagine that being much, much scarier, like purposefully horrifying. So that was scrapped because the senior Imagineers said no, basically. They thought that it was too frightening for a Disney attraction, makes sense, and that because Disney had a certain rule of thumb at that time where they only used PG related, products in their parks. Of course, that's different now with like the Indiana Jones ride, for example. That's a PG-13 movie, but back then it was like PG movies are the only type of things we'll incorporate into our attractions. So, Eisner and his team went back to work and they came up with another idea, a very rough idea, where it would be Eisner was really like, he really wanted the xenomorph to be in this ride, right? So he and his team went back and they came up with this new idea where it would be like a xenomorph terrorizing the audience. That sort of worked its way into what we know as today, but again, like he couldn't use the xenomorph. So he decided, okay, I want this ride to be like this, the dark. You sit in the dark, and the sensory stuff's going on. But apparently, we're going to need to come up with an original creature and an original story. So to help with that, he brought in George Lucas. George Lucas had a couple different ideas that didn't really make it through until the final idea finally came into fruition. So his original idea was he wanted the alien to be sort of a sentient creature, so it would terrorize the audience for a little while, and then eventually it would reveal itself to be this sort of benevolent monster, and it would reveal that XS Tech had sort of been using the audience as human guinea pigs to test the alien's abilities, right? So the alien frees them from their seats, and then it goes through the pre-show and it basically kills everyone who worked for SS Tech that we saw in the pre-show. Of course, Disney decided, you know what, that's a little dark, which is surprising considering the actual ride that we ended up getting. So they went back and reworked it, and they made the what we know as today as the Alien Encounter ride. The Alien Encounter ride opened in New Tomorrowland. Now, if we're going to have to look at what is New Tomorrowland now, right? So Tomorrowland is meant to be sort of the envision of the future. But the problem with that is that as we grow as a society and as time progresses, our visions of the future change. So, for example, in the original Tomorrowland in Disneyland, the microwave oven was viewed as this sort of technological advancement of the future that we didn't have yet. But eventually we ended up getting the microwave oven, so that kind of became outdated. So they had to keep updating this land. They had to keep updating Tomorrowland to try and fit the vision of the future. They got tired of doing that because it cost a lot of money, reasonably, and because they didn't want to have to keep finding sponsors and all that stuff to build this stuff. In Disneyland Paris, however, they didn't even have a Tomorrowland, and this is sort of where this whole renaissance began. Instead of a Tomorrowland in Disneyland Paris, they had Discoveryland, which was a vision of the future as viewed by through the eyes, we'll say, of people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, like science fiction, sort of steampunkish, type of stuff. So that's what Discoveryland was. They looked at that and they said, let's try and replicate something like that. A timeless vision of the future. One that's not trying to be accurate, but one that's more grounded in fantasy. So Disneyland was going to originally receive a whole new land called Tomorrowland 2055, and Alien Encounter was supposed to premiere in Disneyland. In the old Mission Tomorrow's building. Now, those of you who have been to Disneyland, if you've been to Tomorrowland and you've seen Red Rocket's Pizza, that is where Alien Encounter was planned to open, was in that building. However, that was scrapped because of the failure of Disneyland Paris. Michael Eisner did not want to pour more money into all these ambitious projects, which is sad. But and also because the construction was delayed on the Disneyland park, the construction on New Tomorrowland in Disney World was already underway, so they just finished it. New Tomorrowland was based on the idea of an alien spaceport. So the entire land was, I sort of touched on this earlier, the entire land was themed around like this alien spaceport, and every building had a certain function. For example, there was the other the other attraction I'm going to talk about someday is the Timekeeper ride was there, and the Science Center. The People Movers were the transportation through the city. You had the convention center where Alien Encounter was being held, and you had all these buildings that sort of tied together into one storyline, which is kind of cool. So they updated Disney World's Tomorrowland, but Disneyland didn't really get a whole lot of updating there. They painted Space Mountain bronze for a little bit, and then they painted it back to white, and they installed the new Astro Movers that are sort of like steampunky, but that's basically it. So Alien Encounter soft opened to the public in, I believe it was like 1994. So the thing with the soft opening was that a lot of people said that it wasn't scary enough. So they went back and they made it even scarier. And over the course of Alien Encounter's lifetime, it underwent several changes to be more scary. So they eventually dropped Phil Hartman because they felt like the pre-show was too lighthearted. That it's not. They wanted to make it very clear that this ride had a very dark tone in the pre-show, so that parents would leave if their kids were disturbed by the pre-show rather than having to go for the actual ride, which is smart. But unfortunately, it didn't really do enough to dissuade parents from taking their kids on the ride. But we'll get to that later. So they replaced Phil Hartman with Tim Curry. So that's one thing we did to make it scarier. They also eventually they decided that the ride was too scary, so they added some jokes in there. And how they did this was they would have fake guests. Like when you were sitting in the dark, you would hear somebody dropping puns as the alien was running through the audience, and it was really strange. Like it would be like a pre-recording of a guest saying like, "That's not an alien, it's my mother-in-law," ha 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 ha, to try and get people to laugh. But the problem is, it was like completely out of place in this ride, so it made it just really strange, basically, and it didn't do a whole lot to make it a funny ride. So, why did it close? We're gonna get to that in a second.
A visitor from another galaxy is taking over Tomorrowland in the Magic Kingdom Park at Stitch's Great Escape. You've just been recruited by the Galactic Federation as a guard to provide security at the Prisoner Teleportation Center for its latest inmate. Prisoners generally come in two types, your level 1s and your level 2s. But today, the worst of the worst has arrived. He's naughty, he's gross, he's uncontrollable. He's a level 3. It's Experiment 626.
Now, the main reason Alien Encounter closed was pretty simple, actually. It was just too scary for Disney. This ride it was a really high-tech, like, brand new, unique ride, and it was amazing, to be honest. But was it appropriate? No. And a lot of parents complained about it, and eventually they just got tired of hearing so many parents complain about how scary it was that they decided to shut it down, sadly. Now, an interesting thing is that a lot of people think that if this ride had used the xenomorph from Alien, it would have actually succeeded, and we might actually still have it today. Now, the reason they say this is because with the Alien franchise, you have a couple built-in things, right? You have marketing, so people will ride the ride because they've seen Alien and they enjoyed it. You have parental controls, because people who've seen Alien know that it's not appropriate to take their kids on an Alien ride, for example. So that would have maybe helped it have a longer lifespan, because as is, the ride actually opened in 1995 and it closed in 2003, so it was only around for 8 years. It was replaced by Stitch's Great Escape, which, completely honest here, it's a terrible ride. Right now it's only open seasonally and it's about to close forever. However, it does use a lot of the same props, so if you are interested in what this ride used to look like, you can go on this Stitch ride and actually use a lot of the same stuff that the Alien Encounter ride used, which is interesting to me. So that's the history of Alien Encounter. You can do more research on it if you want. This is just sort of a bare bones basic view of it, but I hope you enjoyed this. This is my first podcast, so it's going to probably suck. I know I'm using and a lot. I'm kind of nervous. I just did it again. I'm kind of nervous, but, I'll get better at this, I'm sure. I think next I'm going to cover Matterhorn bobsleds, so look forward to that, and I'll see you guys later.